There's a psychological experiment you've probably been running on yourself without realizing it. Every time you answer immediately, every time you say yes before they finish asking, every time you cancel your plans to fix someone else's problem, you are teaching people exactly how little your time is worth. And the worst part? The people doing this to you aren't bad people. You train them. Psychologists have a term for it: compulsive availability. It doesn't look like a problem from the outside. In fact, it looks like a virtue. You're reliable. You're generous. You're the person everyone can count on. But here's what nobody tells you about being that person. Reliability, when it has no limits, stops being a quality people respect. It becomes a resource people consume. Think about electricity. You don't think about it. You don't thank it. You don't wonder if it's tired. You just flip the switch and expect it to work. And the moment you become endlessly available to someone, emotionally, practically, logistically, that's exactly what you become to them. Not a person, a utility. And utilities don't get appreciated. They get used. I want to tell you about a woman named Camille. Camille was a project manager at a mid-sized company. Smart, organized, fast. When her team hit a wall, they came to Camille. When a deadline appeared out of nowhere, they texted Camille. When the system crashed at 11 p.m. on a Friday, you already know who they called. And Camille answered. Every time. She told herself it was because she cared about the work. And she did. But if she's being honest, part of it was something else. Something quieter. She liked being needed. Because being needed felt like being valued. That's the trap. And almost nobody sees it until it's too late. One Thursday morning, Camille's phone died. Not metaphorically, physically. Cracked screen, wouldn't turn on, completely dead. She was traveling for a family event and didn't have a charger. She was unreachable for 36 hours. When she got back online, she expected chaos. Missed fires. Panic messages. Evidence that the whole operation had collapsed without her. Instead, and this is the part that genuinely shook her, almost everything had been handled. Her colleagues had made decisions. Her team had figured things out. One junior employee who never seemed confident had apparently led a client call that went better than expected. Camille sat in her car and stared at her phone for a long time. She felt something she wasn't prepared for. It wasn't relief. It wasn't gratitude that her team had stepped up. It was something closer to grief. Here's what Camille had to sit with, and what you might have to sit with too. When you make yourself permanently available, you aren't just helping people. You are quietly preventing them from developing the one thing that would actually serve them long-term: confidence in their own judgment. There's research on this. In developmental psychology, it's called scaffolding removal. When a child is learning to walk, you hold their hand. But at some point, if you never let go, you don't help them walk. You teach them they can't walk without you. The same dynamic plays out in adult relationships. At work, in friendships, in families. Every time you solve a problem someone could have solved themselves, you send them a message that bypasses language entirely. It goes straight to the subconscious. And the message is, you needed me for that. Repeated enough times, that message becomes their belief. And then they need you. Not because you're special, because you've accidentally convinced them they're incapable. Now here's where I want to push back on something. Because the obvious conclusion here is, stop helping people. Set hard limits. Say no more. And that's not wrong. But it's incomplete. The real insight isn't about less availability. It's about intentional availability. There's a difference between being present because you've chosen to be, and being present because you're afraid of what happens if you're not. One is generosity. The other is anxiety wearing a generous mask. And most people who are chronically overavailable aren't doing it out of kindness. They're doing it because somewhere, early on, they learned that their value to others depended on their usefulness to others. That's not a giving problem. That's a self-worth problem. And no amount of boundary setting fixes it until you address that root. When Camille finally had an honest conversation with herself, she realized something layered. Yes, her team had survived without her. But more importantly, she had survived not being needed for 36 hours. The world didn't end. Her value didn't vanish. Her relationships didn't dissolve. And when she returned, something subtle but significant had shifted. Her colleagues didn't take her less seriously. They took her more seriously. Because for the first time, they'd had to consider what it would look like if she weren't there. Scarcity changes perception. It always has. This isn't cynical, it's human. We are wired to assign value based in part on availability. It's the same principle behind why a restaurant with a 2-week wait feels more desirable than one with empty tables every night. Rationally, you know that's not a reliable signal of quality. Emotionally, you can't help but factor it in. Your presence operates the same way. When it's infinite, it registers as ordinary. When it becomes selective, it registers as meaningful. So here's the question this all leads to. Not, are the people in your life ungrateful? That's the wrong question, and it keeps you focused outward. The real question is, what are you afraid would happen if you became less available? Would people leave? Would they stop calling? Would they find someone else to fill the gap and realize they didn't need you as much as you thought? If any of those fears feel familiar, that's the actual conversation. Not about other people's behavior, about your own relationship with being needed. Because here's what I've noticed. The people who struggle most with overavailability aren't struggling because they love too much. They're struggling because they trust themselves too little. They don't believe their presence is valuable on its own terms, separate from their usefulness. So they keep performing usefulness, hoping that eventually it will add up to belonging. It never does. Not in a sustainable way. Camille didn't become unavailable after her 36-hour disappearance. That's not the ending. What changed was subtler. She started asking one question before saying yes to anything. Am I doing this because I want to, or because I'm afraid not to? When the answer was fear, she paused. Not always. Not perfectly. But enough that people around her started adjusting. They started figuring things out before coming to her. They started trusting their own instincts first. And when they did come to her, it was because they genuinely wanted her perspective, not because they defaulted to her out of habit. And Camille felt something she hadn't expected from pulling back slightly. She felt more respected. Not less connected, more respected. Because the relationships became honest. They were no longer built on her constant output. They were built on actual choice. That's a different kind of being needed. One that doesn't hollow you out. Here's the thing about availability that nobody frames this way. When you are always there, for everyone, you teach the world that your time has no cost. And things with no cost get treated accordingly. But the moment you become selective, not cold, not distant, but genuinely intentional, something shifts. Your yes means something. Your presence carries weight. People notice when you show up because they can no longer assume that you will. You don't have to disappear to matter more. You just have to stop pretending that your time is infinite. It isn't. And somewhere, quietly, you've always known that. The real question is whether you're ready to act like it.